Sarah Matthews had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their senior year planning college parties and spring break trips, she found herself drawn to community service and volunteering at the local women's shelter. Her parents, both successful lawyers in Portland, Oregon, had raised her with strong values about helping others, but they never expected their daughter to make such a life-changing decision at 18. The opportunity came through their church's outreach program. Pastor Williams had received a request from a remote Modoc reservation in Northern California, where a single father desperately needed help caring for his 6-year-old twin daughters. The man's wife had passed away 2 years earlier, and he was struggling to balance his job as a forest ranger with raising 2 active children. The twins needed stability, education, and a gentle feminine presence in their lives. Sarah's mother, Patricia, initially dismissed the idea entirely. "Absolutely not," she declared over dinner when Sarah first mentioned the request. "You're 18 years old, Sarah. You should be thinking about college, not playing house with strangers in the middle of nowhere." Her father, Robert, was equally concerned but recognized the determined look in his daughter's eyes, the same expression she'd worn when she decided to tutor underprivileged children instead of joining the debate team. The reservation was a 4-hour drive from any major city, nestled in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains. The landscape was breathtaking but isolated, with rolling hills covered in pine forests and meadows that stretched for miles without seeing another soul. The nearest neighbor lived 20 minutes away by truck, and the closest school was an hour's drive down winding mountain roads. It was a place where cell phone service was spotty at best, and the internet connection barely existed. Joseph Crowfeather was 34 years old and had lived on the reservation his entire life. His great-grandfather had been one of the last traditional chiefs of the Modoc people, and Joseph carried himself with quiet dignity that spoke of generations of wisdom and hardship. He stood just over 6 feet tall, with weathered hands from years of outdoor work and eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. When he smiled, which wasn't often since his wife's death, his whole face transformed into something warm and welcoming. The twins, Emma and Grace, were mirror images of each other with long black hair that their father braided each morning before work. Emma was the bold one, always ready for adventure and quick to speak her mind. Grace was gentler, preferring to observe before acting. But when she laughed, it was like music filling the small cabin they called home. Both girls had been deeply affected by their mother's sudden death from cancer, and Joseph worried constantly about providing them with proper guidance as they grew older. Sarah's first meeting with the family took place at the Tribal Community Center, a modest building that served as the heart of reservation life. She had driven up with her parents, who insisted on meeting Joseph before allowing their daughter to make such a commitment. The building smelled of sage and old wood, and the walls were decorated with beautiful traditional artwork created by local artisans. Joseph arrived precisely on time, holding both girls' hands as they walked through the door. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, but there was something about his presence that commanded respect. The twins hung back shyly at first, peeking out from behind their father's legs as Patricia and Robert peppered him with questions about living conditions, safety, and expectations. Sarah found herself watching the girls instead of listening to the adult conversation. Emma kept stealing glances at her, clearly curious but trying to appear uninterested. Grace clutched a small stuffed horse and whispered something to it as if sharing secrets. When Sarah smiled at them, Emma straightened up and walked over boldly. "Are you going to be our new mom?" Emma asked directly, causing an uncomfortable silence to fall over the group. Joseph's face reddened slightly and he gently corrected his daughter, explaining that Sarah was just coming to help take care of them and help with their schooling. "I'd like to be your friend," Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's eye level, "and maybe I can help you and Grace with reading and math, and we can have fun together too." Grace finally emerged from behind her father, still holding her stuffed horse, and nodded seriously as if Sarah had passed some important test. The cabin where they lived was small but well-maintained, with 2 bedrooms, a living area that opened into a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom with a shower that Joseph had installed himself. The girls shared one bedroom with bunk beds that Joseph had built from local pine, decorated with quilts made by their late mother. Sarah would stay in the guest room, which was barely large enough for a single bed and a small dresser, but it had a window that looked out over the mountains. Joseph explained that he worked long shifts during fire season, sometimes being away for several days at a time, fighting wildfires or conducting safety inspections in remote areas. During the school year, he struggled to get the girls to the bus stop on time while managing his responsibilities. He needed someone reliable, someone who could provide stability and educational support while respecting their family's traditions and privacy. Sarah's parents were clearly uncomfortable with the living arrangements and the isolation, but they could see how much their daughter wanted to help. Patricia pulled Sarah aside and expressed her concerns about spending a year in such a remote location with virtual strangers. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. "What if this man isn't who he seems to be? You'll be completely cut off from everything familiar." But Sarah had already made up her mind. Something about Joseph's quiet strength and the way he looked at his daughters with such obvious love convinced her that this was exactly where she needed to be. She had grown up in comfort and privilege, and part of her yearned for something real and meaningful. The opportunity to make a genuine difference in these children's lives felt like a calling she couldn't ignore. As they prepared to leave that day, Joseph pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. His voice was low and serious as he thanked her for considering helping his family. "The girls need someone like you," he said simply. "Someone patient and kind. They've been through enough pain for 2 lifetimes." There was something in his eyes when he said this, a depth of sorrow that seemed to go beyond just losing his wife. But Sarah didn't press for details. The drive back to Portland was tense, with her parents trying one last time to change her mind. But Sarah had found her purpose, and nothing they could say would deter her from this path. She would return to the reservation in 2 weeks, bringing her belongings and commitment to spending the next year helping raise Emma and Grace. What she didn't know was that Joseph Crowfeather carried secrets that would challenge everything she thought she understood about family, loyalty, and the price of protecting the people you love. 2 weeks later, Sarah arrived at the reservation with 2 suitcases and a determination that surprised even herself. Her parents had driven her up one final time, making Joseph promise to call if any problems arose. Patricia hugged her daughter tightly, whispering warnings about being careful and trusting her instincts. Robert pressed a satellite phone into her hands, insisting she keep it charged at all times for emergencies. The first few days were an adjustment for everyone. The twins tested Sarah's patience and authority, clearly unsure about having another adult in their lives. Emma would deliberately ignore instructions about bedtime, while Grace became unusually clingy, following Sarah around the cabin like a shadow. Joseph tried to maintain normalcy, but Sarah could sense his discomfort with having a stranger, especially a young woman, living in such close quarters with his family. Sarah established routines slowly and carefully. She woke up early to help Joseph braid the girls' hair, learning the traditional patterns their mother had taught them. She prepared simple breakfasts and packed lunches for school days, walking with them to the bus stop at the end of their long gravel driveway. In the evenings, she helped with homework and read bedtime stories, gradually earning their trust through consistency and genuine care. Joseph worked unpredictable hours, sometimes leaving before dawn for fire prevention duties and returning well after dark. Sarah noticed he was always tired, carrying stress in his shoulders that seemed to go beyond normal work pressures. He rarely talked about his job, offering only brief explanations about equipment checks or training exercises when the girls asked where he'd been all day. The isolation of reservation life became apparent quickly. The nearest grocery store was 40 minutes away, and Sarah learned to plan meals carefully since trips to town were infrequent. The silence at night was profound, broken only by owls calling from the forest and the occasional distant howl of coyotes. Sarah had grown up with the constant hum of city traffic and found the absolute quiet both peaceful and occasionally unnerving. 3 weeks into her stay, Sarah began noticing small things that didn't quite add up. Joseph received phone calls at odd hours, always stepping outside to take them. He would return looking worried or agitated, but when asked if everything was okay, he would just nod and change the subject. Sometimes he would disappear for entire weekends, claiming emergency work situations, leaving Sarah alone with the twins who seemed accustomed to their father's unpredictable absences. The girls began warming up to Sarah more each day. Emma's defiance softened into protective concern, often asking if Sarah was happy living with them and if she planned to stay. Grace started sharing her drawings and stories, slowly opening up about missing her mother and worrying about her father. Both children were remarkably mature for their age, handling responsibilities like feeding their chickens and helping with laundry without being asked. Sarah discovered that the twins had been largely caring for themselves even before she arrived. They knew how to prepare simple meals, do basic housework, and follow safety procedures their father had drilled into them. When she complimented them on being so capable, Emma shrugged and said matter-of-factly, "Daddy taught us we might need to take care of ourselves sometimes." The comment stuck with Sarah, making her wonder exactly what kind of situations Joseph was preparing his daughters for. Most 6-year-olds weren't taught emergency protocols beyond basic fire safety. But Emma and Grace knew things like which neighbors to call in different types of emergencies, where important documents were kept, and how to use the radio in Joseph's truck. Joseph's behavior around other people also struck Sarah as unusual. When neighbors stopped by or when they encountered other families at the community center, he was polite but kept conversations brief. He seemed constantly alert, scanning faces and watching vehicles that drove past their property. Sarah initially attributed this to natural caution living in such an isolated area, but gradually realized his vigilance went beyond normal safety awareness. One afternoon while Joseph was at work, Sarah was helping the girls clean their room when she noticed Grace trying to reach something on a high shelf in the closet. When Sarah climbed up to help, she discovered a small wooden box hidden behind folded blankets. Grace immediately became upset, saying they weren't supposed to touch Daddy's special box, and that it was very important they never tell anyone about it. Sarah carefully placed the box back exactly where she found it, but the incident raised new questions. Why would Joseph hide something from his own children, and why would he teach them to keep secrets about it? That evening, she watched him more carefully, noticing how he periodically glanced toward the girls' bedroom door, as if checking on something beyond just his sleeping daughters. The nearest neighbors, an elderly Modoc couple named Tom and Rita Blackhorse, lived about 20 minutes away by truck. Rita occasionally stopped by with fresh bread or vegetables from her garden, and Sarah looked forward to these visits as a connection to the broader community. During one such visit, Rita mentioned how glad she was that Joseph finally had help with the girls, adding quietly that he had been carrying too much weight alone for too long. When Sarah asked what she meant, Rita's expression became guarded. She glanced around as if checking who might overhear before saying simply, "That man has been through things no father should have to face. The girls need someone like you, someone from outside who can give them normal life." When pressed for details, Rita just shook her head and changed the subject, but not before Sarah caught a look of genuine worry in her eyes. School days provided some relief from the growing questions in Sarah's mind. The twins thrived with her help on homework and educational activities, showing remarkable intelligence and curiosity about the world beyond their mountain home. Emma excelled in math and science, while Grace had a gift for storytelling and art. Both girls spoke basic Modoc phrases their father had taught them, proudly sharing their heritage while also embracing learning about other cultures. But even during peaceful moments, Sarah noticed the girls would sometimes stop playing and listen intently to sounds outside. A car engine, footsteps on the porch, unfamiliar voices. They had learned to be alert in ways that seemed beyond their years, and Sarah began to understand that their father's caution had been passed down to them as a survival skill, rather than simple prudence. Joseph returned home late one Friday evening looking more exhausted than usual. The girls had already gone to bed and Sarah was reading in the living room when she heard his truck pull up. He came through the door moving slowly, his ranger uniform dusty and his face drawn with fatigue that seemed deeper than physical tiredness. When he saw Sarah, he managed a tired smile and thanked her for taking such good care of his daughters. As he prepared for bed, Sarah noticed him pause at the girls' bedroom door longer than usual, listening to their breathing before quietly closing the door. He checked the locks on both the front and back doors, something she had seen him do every night, and glanced out the windows before finally heading to his own room. These weren't the actions of a man simply tired from a long day at work. They were the habits of someone living with constant awareness of potential danger. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about all the small details that had been accumulating over the past month. Joseph's secretive phone calls, the twins' unusual maturity and alertness, the hidden box, Rita's cryptic comments about weight he was carrying alone. She was beginning to realize that she had accepted a position that involved much more than helping care for two motherless children. Joseph Crowfeather was protecting his family from something specific, and Sarah was now part of whatever careful balance he had constructed to keep his daughters safe. The breakthrough came during Sarah's 6th week at the reservation, when a severe storm knocked out power lines and phone service throughout the area. Joseph had left that morning for what he described as routine fire prevention work, expecting to return by evening. But as darkness fell and the storm intensified, there was no sign of his truck on the winding road that led to their cabin. Sarah wasn't particularly worried at first. She had learned that Joseph's work often kept him out later than planned, and the storm could easily have delayed his return. She fed the twins dinner by candlelight, turning the power outage into an adventure with shadow puppets and storytelling. Emma and Grace seemed to enjoy the novelty, though Sarah noticed they kept glancing toward the windows whenever wind rattled the cabin. By 10 o'clock, with no word from Joseph and the storm still raging, Sarah began to feel genuine concern. The satellite phone her father had given her wasn't working, and the landline was dead. She was completely cut off from the outside world with two young children in an increasingly violent storm. Trees were bending dangerously in the wind, and she could hear branches crashing down around the property. The twins had been put to bed hours earlier, but around midnight, Sarah heard quiet footsteps in the hallway. She found both girls standing outside their bedroom door, fully dressed in warm clothes and shoes. Emma was holding a small backpack while Grace clutched her stuffed horse and a flashlight. "Daddy's not back yet," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We need to be ready." When Sarah asked what they needed to be ready for, Grace explained that their father had taught them what to do if he didn't come home when expected. They were supposed to get dressed, pack important things, and be prepared to leave quickly if necessary. The revelation that 6-year-old children had been given detailed instructions for their father's potential absence was deeply troubling. Sarah asked gently what else their daddy had taught them about emergency situations. Emma and Grace exchanged glances before Emma spoke up, clearly having been designated as the spokesperson for such discussions. Their father had taught them 3 important rules, Emma explained. First, if strangers came to the house and Daddy wasn't home, they should hide in the special place he had shown them and stay quiet until the people left. Second, if Daddy didn't come home for 2 nights in a row, they should take their emergency bag and walk to Tom and Rita's house, staying off the main road and using the forest paths Daddy had shown them. Third, they should never tell anyone outside the family about Daddy's special work or the people who sometimes called him. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications of these instructions. Joseph wasn't just a forest ranger dealing with normal workplace hazards. He was involved in something dangerous enough that he felt his children needed escape plans and protocols for hiding from strangers. The weight of responsibility she had unknowingly accepted began to settle on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She spent the rest of the night awake, listening to every sound outside while the twins slept fitfully in their beds. Her mind raced with questions about what she had gotten herself into, and whether she was equipped to protect these children if whatever Joseph feared actually materialized. Dawn broke gray and cloudy with the storm finally beginning to weaken, but there was still no sign of Joseph's truck. Around 8 in the morning, Sarah heard a vehicle approaching on the gravel road. Relief flooded through her until she realized the engine sound was wrong, deeper and more powerful than Joseph's truck. Looking out the window, she saw a large black SUV with tinted windows pulling into their driveway. 2 men in dark clothing got out, both wearing sunglasses despite the overcast morning. Following the twins' instructions, Sarah quickly woke them and told them to go to their special hiding place. The girls moved with practiced efficiency, disappearing into what Sarah now realized was a carefully concealed space behind the false back of their bedroom closet. Emma pressed the emergency phone their father had given them into Sarah's hands before vanishing behind the hidden panel. The men knocked firmly on the front door, and when Sarah answered, they introduced themselves as federal agents looking for Joseph Crowfeather. They showed badges and identification, but something about their manner made Sarah deeply uncomfortable. They asked too many questions about Joseph's daily routines, his friends, and his recent activities. When they asked to search the house, Sarah politely but firmly refused, saying they would need a warrant. The agents exchanged glances and one of them made a phone call. speaking quietly into his device while walking back toward their vehicle. Sarah used this opportunity to text a brief message on the emergency phone. Fed agents here asking questions. Girl safe. She hoped Joseph would receive it wherever he was and understand the gravity of the situation. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, the agents returned to the door. They handed Sarah a business card and said Joseph should call them immediately when he returned. They emphasized that it was very important they speak with him, and that delaying contact would not be in his best interests. Their tone carried an unmistakable threat beneath the professional courtesy. Once their SUV disappeared down the road, Sarah retrieved the twins from their hiding place. Both girls handled the situation with remarkable calm, asking practical questions about what the men wanted and whether Daddy was in trouble. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of dangerous visitors seeking their father confirmed Sarah's growing understanding that this was not the first time such incidents had occurred. Grace asked if they should pack their emergency bags and go to Tom and Rita's house, since Daddy had been gone all night and strangers had come looking for him. The fact that a 6-year-old was calmly discussing evacuation procedures broke Sarah's heart and strengthened her resolve to protect them at all costs. Joseph finally returned late that afternoon, his face grim when he saw Sarah waiting for him on the porch. Before he could even get out of his truck, she told him about the federal agents and showed him the business card they had left. His expression darkened as he read the name and phone number, and Sarah saw fear flash across his features before he quickly controlled it. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Joseph finally opened up to Sarah about the reality of their situation. His voice was quiet but steady as he explained that he wasn't just a forest ranger. For the past 3 years, he had been working as an informant for various law enforcement agencies, providing information about illegal activities on reservation lands and in the surrounding forest areas. The work had started innocently enough, Joseph explained. Drug traffickers had been using remote areas of the reservation to transport narcotics and process illegal substances. As someone who knew the land intimately and had the trust of the community, Joseph had been approached to help identify and stop these operations. What began as civic duty had gradually evolved into something much more complex and dangerous. Joseph had discovered that the drug operations were connected to larger criminal organizations, with significant resources and reach. His information had led to several major arrests and the seizure of millions of dollars worth of illegal drugs. But his effectiveness as an informant had also made him a target for retaliation from the very criminals he was helping to catch. The federal agents who had visited that morning represented a turf war between different law enforcement agencies over Joseph's cooperation and information. Some wanted to push him deeper into dangerous situations, while others wanted to extract him from the operations entirely. Joseph was caught in the middle, trying to balance his duty to his community with his responsibility to keep his daughters safe. Sarah listened in stunned silence as Joseph revealed the true reason he had needed help with his children. It wasn't just about work schedules and childcare. It was about having someone trustworthy to protect Emma and Grace if his dangerous double life finally caught up with him. The secret he had been carrying was the knowledge that every day could be the day his enemies discovered his identity and came for his family. As the full weight of the situation settled over Sarah, she realized she was no longer just a nanny or tutor helping a single father. She had become the last line of defense for 2 innocent children, whose father was risking everything to fight criminals who wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who stood in their way. The question now was whether she had the courage and strength to continue protecting them when the stakes were so much higher than she had ever imagined. In the days following Joseph's revelation, Sarah found herself seeing everything through new eyes. The remote location that had once seemed peaceful now felt like strategic positioning. The twins' unusual maturity wasn't just the result of losing their mother early. It was survival training disguised as normal childhood development. Every routine in their household had been designed with security in mind. Joseph showed Sarah the full extent of the safety measures he had put in place. The cabin had reinforced doors and windows that looked ordinary, but were much stronger than standard construction. Hidden throughout the property were emergency supply caches containing food, water, first aid supplies, and communication equipment. The forest paths the girls knew weren't just for nature walks. They were carefully planned escape routes that avoided main roads and led to safe houses within the reservation community. The most shocking discovery was the hidden room beneath the cabin, accessible through a concealed trapdoor in the kitchen pantry. Joseph had built it himself over the course of several months, creating a space large enough for him and the girls to hide for several days if necessary. It contained survival supplies, weapons, and documentation that could help them disappear entirely if their identities were compromised. Sarah struggled with the enormity of what she had learned. Part of her wanted to pack her bags and return to the safety of her parents' home in Portland. But looking at Emma and Grace, who continued their daily routines of school, homework, and play despite living under such constant threat, she felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised her. These children deserved normalcy and security, and she was perhaps their best chance at maintaining some semblance of childhood innocence. Joseph began including Sarah in more of his security protocols, teaching her how to use the emergency communications equipment and showing her the various signals and codes he had established with trusted community members. Tom and Rita Blackhorse, she learned, were more than friendly neighbors. They were part of a network of reservation residents who helped protect families involved in dangerous law enforcement cooperation. The federal agents returned twice more over the following weeks, each visit increasing the tension in the household. Joseph met with them outside the cabin, never allowing them inside where the girls might overhear conversations. Sarah could see the stress wearing on him, the constant pressure of balancing his informant duties with his responsibilities as a father. His sleep became fitful, and he started checking the property's perimeter multiple times each night. Emma and Grace adapted to Sarah's increased involvement in their security routines with the resilience that continued to amaze her. They practiced evacuation drills disguised as games of hide-and-seek, learned new hand signals for silent communication, and accepted changes to their daily schedules without complaint. Their trust in both their father and Sarah never wavered, even as the adult world around them grew more complex and threatening. The breaking point came during Sarah's 10th week at the reservation. Joseph received a late-night phone call that left him pale and shaken. After hanging up, he told Sarah they needed to implement immediate security measures. One of his contacts had been discovered and killed, and there were indications that the criminal organization was systematically identifying and eliminating informants throughout the region. For 3 days, they remained in virtual lockdown. Joseph called in sick to work and stayed home, maintaining constant watch over the property. The girls were kept home from school under the pretense of minor illnesses, and all visitors were turned away except for Tom Blackhorse, who came by each evening to check on them and share any news from the community network. During those tense days, Sarah witnessed the full extent of Joseph's dedication to protecting his daughters. He barely slept, positioning himself where he could watch all approaches to the cabin while remaining hidden from outside observation. His ranger training was evident in how he moved through the forest around their property, checking for signs of surveillance or unwanted visitors. The man she had initially seen as a grieving widower struggling with single parenthood was actually a highly capable operative fighting a shadow war to keep his family safe. The immediate threat passed when law enforcement agencies conducted coordinated raids that resulted in multiple arrests and the disruption of the criminal network's local operations. But Joseph knew it was only a temporary respite. The larger organization would regroup and rebuild, and his value as an informant meant he would continue to be a target as long as he remained involved in their operations. Sarah began to understand the impossible choice Joseph faced daily. His information was crucial to law enforcement efforts to combat drug trafficking and related crimes that were devastating reservation communities throughout the region. Young people were dying from overdoses, families were being destroyed by addiction, and the traditional way of life was under assault from outside criminal influences. Joseph's work was making a real difference in protecting his people and their culture, but continuing as an informant meant accepting that his daughters would never have a normal childhood. They would always live with the knowledge that their father's enemies might come for them. They would need to maintain constant vigilance, ready to flee or hide at a moment's notice. The psychological cost of such an existence was immeasurable, yet Joseph felt he had no choice but to continue, fighting for the greater good of his community. Sarah found herself becoming more than just a caretaker for the twins. She was becoming a partner in Joseph's efforts to balance duty and family. She took over more of the household responsibilities, freeing him to focus on his dangerous work while ensuring the girls maintained educational progress and emotional stability. She learned to read the subtle signs that indicated increased threat levels, adjusting routines and activities accordingly. The most difficult aspect was maintaining the girls' innocence while preparing them for realities no children should have to face. Sarah worked with Joseph to create explanations for their security measures that acknowledged danger without creating paralyzing fear. They were told that Daddy's work sometimes made bad people angry, and that the family needed to be extra careful until those people were caught and punished. Emma and Grace accepted these explanations with the wisdom of children who had learned to trust the adults protecting them. They continued to excel in their studies, maintain friendships with other reservation children, and find joy in simple pleasures like fishing in the nearby stream or helping Sarah tend the small garden behind the cabin. Their resilience was both heartbreaking and inspiring, showing Sarah the incredible capacity of children to adapt to extraordinary circumstances. As autumn approached, Joseph received word that his handlers were planning a major operation that would require his deep involvement over several months. The risks would be higher than anything he had previously undertaken, with potential for extended periods away from home and increased danger to his family. The question was whether their current security arrangements would be sufficient to protect Emma and Grace during such an intensive and dangerous phase of his undercover work. Looking at Sarah, across the dinner table one evening, watching her help Grace with homework while Emma told them both about her day at school, Joseph realized how much his family had come to depend on this remarkable young woman who had entered their lives seeking only to help. She had proven herself capable of far more than anyone could have expected, but the challenges ahead would test everyone's limits. The secret he carried was no longer his burden alone. It had become a shared responsibility that would define all their futures. The major operation Joseph's handlers had planned began in early October, requiring him to infiltrate a sophisticated drug manufacturing facility hidden deep in the national forest. The criminal organization had established what authorities believed was one of the largest methamphetamine production operations on the West Coast, using the remote wilderness to avoid detection while poisoning the environment and surrounding communities. Joseph's role would be to gain the trust of the operations security team by posing as a corrupt forest ranger, willing to provide information about law enforcement activities in exchange for money. It was an extremely dangerous assignment that required him to be away from home for days at a time while maintaining his cover identity. The slightest mistake could expose him as an informant and result in immediate execution. Sarah found herself functioning as a single parent during Joseph's extended absences, responsible for every aspect of the twins' care while maintaining the security protocols that kept them all safe. She drove them to school each morning, helped with homework each afternoon, and tucked them into bed each night, all while listening for unusual sounds and watching for unfamiliar vehicles that might indicate threats to their safety. The stress of the situation was enormous, but Sarah drew strength from the girls' continued trust and resilience. Emma had become fiercely protective of both Sarah and Grace, often positioning herself between them and any perceived threats. Grace expressed her anxiety through her artwork, creating detailed drawings of their cabin surrounded by protective forests and guardian animals that she said kept bad people away. Communication with Joseph was limited to brief, coded messages sent through secure channels at predetermined times. Sarah learned to interpret his updates, understanding that equipment checks going well meant he was safe and maintaining his cover, while weather conditions changing indicated increased danger or complications with the operation. The longest period without contact was 6 days, during which Sarah barely slept, and the twins seemed to sense the heightened tension despite her efforts to maintain normal routines. During one of Joseph's longer absences, Sarah noticed a car driving slowly past their property multiple times over the course of a week. The vehicle was different each day, sometimes a sedan, sometimes a pickup truck, sometimes an SUV, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone was conducting surveillance on their home, watching their daily routines and looking for vulnerabilities. Following Joseph's instructions for such situations, Sarah implemented elevated security measures without alarming the twins. She varied their departure times for school, used different routes when possible, and arranged for Tom Blackhorse to escort them home several afternoons. She also activated one of the emergency communication devices to alert the law enforcement network that their household was under potential threat. The response was swift and professional. Within hours, unmarked vehicles were positioned at strategic points around the reservation, and several undercover agents had taken up temporary residence in the area, posing as hunters and campers. The surveillance on Sarah's household stopped immediately, but the incident reinforced how exposed they were when Joseph was away conducting his dangerous work. During this period, Sarah also began to understand the broader impact of Joseph's activities on the reservation community. Elderly tribal members who had watched their grandchildren struggle with addiction spoke to her with deep respect for Joseph's courage in fighting the drug trade. Young parents thanked her for supporting a man who was risking everything to protect their families from the poison flowing through their community. But there were also those who questioned whether Joseph's involvement with federal law enforcement was worth the risks to his own family. Some argued that he should prioritize Emma and Grace's safety over his duty to the community, while others believed that cooperation with outside authorities violated traditional tribal sovereignty principles. Sarah found herself defending Joseph's choices while privately struggling with her own doubts about the sustainability of their current situation. The emotional toll on the twins became more apparent as Joseph's operation intensified. Emma began having nightmares about her father not coming home, while Grace became increasingly clingy and reluctant to leave Sarah's side. Both girls were performing well academically, but their teachers noted behavioral changes that suggested stress and anxiety. Sarah worked hard to provide stability and reassurance while being honest about the temporary nature of their father's increased work responsibilities. One evening, while helping Grace with a school project about family traditions, Sarah learned more about the girl's mother and the impact her death had on their family's circumstances. Maria Crowfeather had been a nurse at the reservation health clinic, beloved throughout the community for her compassion and skill. Her sudden death from cancer had devastated Joseph, but it had also eliminated his strongest support system and left him more vulnerable to the pressures that eventually led to his work as an informant. Grace showed Sarah photographs of her mother, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile who clearly adored her family. Maria had been the anchor that kept Joseph grounded and provided emotional stability for the twins. Without her steadying influence, Joseph had thrown himself into dangerous work partly as a way of channeling his grief into something that felt meaningful and necessary. Understanding this context helped Sarah appreciate the complexity of Joseph's motivations and the depth of sacrifice involved in his choices. He wasn't just risking his life for abstract principles. He was trying to honor his wife's memory by protecting the community she had served while providing for the daughters she had loved so deeply. The weight of that responsibility, combined with the constant danger and isolation, would have broken many people. The operation reached a critical phase in late October, when Joseph's handlers informed him that they were ready to move against the drug manufacturing facility. His months of careful work had provided them with detailed intelligence about the operation's structure, security measures, and key personnel. The raid would involve multiple federal agencies and local law enforcement, representing one of the largest coordinated strikes against organized drug trafficking in the region's history. But the final phase would be the most dangerous for Joseph personally. He would need to be present at the facility during the raid to provide real-time intelligence and help identify key targets who might try to escape. There was significant risk that his cover could be blown during the chaos of the operation, exposing him to immediate retaliation from surviving members of the criminal organization. Sarah noticed the change in Joseph's demeanor as the operation approached its climax. He became more affectionate with the twins, spending extra time reading bedtime stories and helping with homework when he was home. He also began having longer private conversations with Sarah about practical matters, emergency contacts, financial arrangements, and detailed instructions for various scenarios that might unfold if something happened to him. The night before the raid, Joseph sat down with both girls for a serious conversation about the importance of listening to Sarah and following all the safety rules they had learned. He told them he would be away for several days on very important work that would help make their community safer for all families. Emma asked directly if he might not come back, and Joseph's honesty in answering showed Sarah the depth of his respect for his daughter's intelligence and resilience. "I'm going to do everything I can to come home to you," he told them quietly. "But if something happens, I need you to know that Sarah will take care of you, and that everything I've done has been to protect you and our people." Grace climbed into his lap and made him promise to be very careful, while Emma just nodded seriously and hugged him tightly. After the girls were asleep, Joseph and Sarah sat on the porch talking about contingency plans and what would happen if the operation went wrong. He had made legal arrangements ensuring that Sarah would have temporary custody of the twins if he was killed or had to disappear into witness protection. He had also set aside money to support their care and education, regardless of what happened to him personally. The conversation was heartbreaking in its practical necessity, but it also revealed the trust Joseph had developed in Sarah's commitment to his daughters. Over the months they had lived together, she had proven herself capable of far more than anyone could have expected. She had become not just their caretaker but their protector, advocate and source of stability in an uncertain world. The raid took place on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Sarah knew it was happening because Joseph had left before dawn, with a tension in his movements that spoke of significant danger ahead. She maintained normal routines with the twins, school, homework, dinner, while monitoring the emergency communication channels for any updates about the operation's progress. News of the raid's success came through official channels first, with local television reports describing the seizure of millions of dollars worth of illegal drugs and the arrest of dozens of suspects. But Sarah's real concern was Joseph's safety, and that information came through encrypted messages indicating that the primary objectives had been achieved without casualties among law enforcement personnel. Joseph returned home 3 days later, exhausted but unharmed, carrying news that would change their lives forever. The operation had been even more successful than anticipated, completely dismantling the criminal organization's regional operations and leading to arrests across multiple states. But Joseph's effectiveness as an informant had been so crucial to the success that his identity was now known to surviving members of the organization and their associates. The family would need to enter witness protection immediately, leaving behind everything they had known for new identities in a distant location. Emma and Grace would have to say goodbye to their school, their friends, and the reservation that had been their entire world. Sarah faced the choice of returning to her own life or joining them in their new existence, becoming a permanent part of their reconstituted family, in whatever form their future would take. The witness protection marshals arrived within 48 hours of Joseph's return, their presence at the cabin marking the end of one chapter of their lives and the uncertain beginning of another. Sarah watched as these efficient professional strangers evaluated their home's security, documented threats against the family, and began the complex process of erasing Joseph Crowfeather's existence while creating entirely new identities for him and his daughters. The timeline was brutally short. They had 1 week to settle their affairs, say their goodbyes, and prepare for relocation to an undisclosed location hundreds of miles away. Joseph would have to resign from his position with the Forest Service. The twins would need to withdraw from school immediately, and all connections to their current life would be permanently severed for their safety. Emma and Grace received the news with the same remarkable composure they had shown throughout all the upheavals in their young lives. Emma asked practical questions about whether they would still be twins in their new identities and whether they could keep their stuffed animals. Grace wanted to know if they would still be Native American in their new life, a question that broke Joseph's heart as he explained that they would always carry their heritage in their hearts, even if they couldn't express it openly in their new home. The most agonizing decision facing the family was what to do about Sarah. The marshals were clear that she could not maintain contact with them after relocation. Any connection to their previous life could compromise their safety, but they also acknowledged her crucial role in the children's stability and offered her the option of entering the program with them, receiving her own new identity and becoming a permanent part of their reconstituted family. Sarah spent sleepless nights wrestling with the choice that would define the rest of her life. Accepting the offer meant abandoning her own family, her education plans, and everything she had known for 19 years. She would never again be able to contact her parents except through carefully monitored and infrequent communications. Her dreams of college and career would need to be completely reimagined within the constraints of witness protection. But refusing The offer meant abandoning Emma and Grace at the moment when they needed stability most. After months of building trust and becoming their primary source of emotional security beyond their father, her departure would be another devastating loss in their young lives. The thought of these children facing relocation and new identities without her support was unbearable. Joseph made no attempt to influence her decision, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking. "You've already given us more than anyone could expect," he told her one evening as they walked through the forest paths that had become so familiar. "Whatever you choose, Emma and Grace will always remember how you protected them and loved them when they needed it most." The reservation community rallied around the family during their final week, though most neighbors knew only that Joseph was being transferred to a new position that required immediate relocation. Tom and Rita Blackhorse organized a farewell gathering where tribal elders blessed the girls for their journey and presented them with small medicine bundles to carry their ancestors' protection wherever they went. Sarah watched Emma and Grace say goodbye to their friends, their teachers, and the places that had shaped their early childhood. They visited their mother's grave one last time, leaving wildflowers and whispered promises to remember her stories. Joseph stood silently among the headstones, shoulders bent under the weight of leaving Maria behind in a place he might never be able to visit again. The hardest part was helping the girls decide which possessions they could take to their new life. Each was allowed one small suitcase of personal items, forcing impossible choices between treasured toys, artwork, and mementos of their mother. Grace ultimately chose her stuffed horse and a few of Maria's jewelry pieces that Joseph had saved for her. Emma packed her favorite books and a collection of rocks she had gathered from special places around the reservation. Sarah made her decision on the Thursday before their scheduled departure. Watching Grace cry herself to sleep after another day of goodbyes and seeing Emma's brave facade cracking as she faced the reality of leaving everything familiar, Sarah knew she couldn't abandon them. When Joseph asked for her final answer, she simply said, "Well, where do I sign?" The relief in Joseph's eyes was matched by the joy on the twins' faces when they learned Sarah would be coming with them. For the first time in weeks, both girls smiled genuinely, and Grace insisted on helping Sarah pack her own allowed suitcase. The family they had become through crisis and necessity would remain together, through whatever challenges lay ahead. The final 48 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, briefings, and emotional farewells. Sarah called her parents to explain her decision, a conversation that was heartbreaking in its finality. Her mother wept openly while her father demanded to speak with the marshals, trying unsuccessfully to understand how his daughter had become entangled in such a dangerous situation. Both parents ultimately expressed pride in her courage, while grieving the loss of the future they had planned together. Sarah's new identity was created with the same meticulous attention to detail as the others. She would become Jennifer Walsh, a distant cousin of the family who had moved in to help care for the children after their father's job transfer. Her background included appropriate educational records, employment history, and documentation that would allow her to continue her studies once they were settled in their new location. Joseph became James Walker, a maintenance supervisor for a regional parks department. Emma and Grace became Lily and Rose Walker, kindergarten-age sisters starting fresh in a new school system. Their birth certificates, medical records, and school transcripts were all expertly crafted to support their new identities while maintaining their actual ages and basic family relationships. The reservation held a private ceremony the night before their departure, with tribal elders performing traditional blessings for those beginning long journeys. Joseph wept openly as the songs were sung and prayers were offered, knowing this might be his last connection to the cultural traditions that had shaped his identity. The girls participated solemnly, understanding that they were saying goodbye to more than just a place. They were leaving behind a way of life that connected them to generations of ancestors. Their departure was arranged for early morning, with unmarked vehicles arriving before dawn to transport them to the first stage of their relocation. Sarah took one last look around the cabin that had become her home, memorizing details she would never see again. The mountain views, the forest paths, the simple rooms where she had learned to love this complicated family. All of it would soon exist only in carefully guarded memories. As they drove away from the reservation in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah held both girls' hands while Joseph stared straight ahead, his jaw set with determination. They were heading into an unknown future together, bound by shared experiences that had transformed them from strangers into an unbreakable family unit. The secret that had brought them together had ultimately freed them to build something new, though the cost of that freedom was higher than any of them could have imagined. Behind them, the sun was rising over the mountains they would never see again, illuminating a landscape that would live on only in their hearts and dreams. 3 years later, Jennifer Walsh stood in the kitchen of a modest suburban home in Minnesota, helping 10-year-old Lily and Rose Walker prepare their school lunches while their father James got ready for another day at the county parks department. The morning routine was comfortable and familiar, bearing little resemblance to the careful security protocols that had once governed every aspect of their daily lives. The transition to their new life had been challenging in ways none of them had anticipated. Beyond the obvious adjustments of new names, new location, and new community, they had struggled with the psychological impact of severing all connections to their previous existence. The girls had needed counseling to process the trauma of constant vigilance and sudden displacement, while Joseph had battled depression as he grieved not just for his wife, but for his entire cultural identity. Sarah, now Jennifer, had faced her own identity crisis as she adapted to being permanently separated from her birth family and the future she had planned. The first year had been particularly difficult, with moments when she questioned whether she had made the right choice. Late-night conversations with Joseph had sustained them both through the darkest periods, as they learned to lean on each other while maintaining appropriate boundaries in their complicated relationship. The suburban community where they had been relocated was everything the reservation had not been: densely populated, culturally homogeneous, and relentlessly normal. The girls attended an excellent public school where their academic abilities quickly earned recognition, though they struggled initially with the social dynamics of children who had never known real hardship or danger. Jennifer enrolled in community college courses, working toward the education degree she had originally planned to pursue. Joseph had perhaps faced the greatest adjustment, transitioning from meaningful work that connected him to his heritage and community, to a mundane maintenance job that paid the bills, but offered little personal satisfaction. The loss of his role as protector and warrior against injustice left him feeling purposeless for months, until he gradually found new ways to serve others through volunteer work with at-risk youth in their new community. The Witness Protection Program had delivered on its promise of safety. There had been no threats, no suspicious visitors, no moments of fear that their past had caught up with them. The criminal organization that had once posed such a deadly threat had been effectively dismantled, its leadership imprisoned or dead, its survivors scattered and powerless. Joseph's sacrifice had achieved its intended purpose. The reservation community was safer, the drug trafficking networks had been disrupted, and his family was alive and thriving. But safety had come at the cost of authenticity. The girls could never speak openly about their Native American heritage, participate in traditional ceremonies, or maintain connections to their cultural roots. They had learned to be careful about the stories they told, the traditions they referenced, and the family history they shared with new friends. Part of their identity would forever remain hidden, protected but also isolated. Jennifer had gradually assumed an increasingly parental role in the family, though her relationship with Joseph remained carefully undefined. They functioned as partners in raising the girls, sharing responsibilities and decisions while maintaining separate bedrooms and avoiding romantic entanglement that could complicate their situation. The love between them was evident to anyone who observed their interactions, but both understood the importance of proceeding cautiously, given the unique circumstances that had brought them together. These girls had blossomed in their new environment. Despite the underlying sadness of their displacement, Lily, formerly Emma, had discovered a talent for mathematics and science that earned her placement in accelerated programs. Rose, who had been Grace, continued to excel in art and creative writing, though her work sometimes revealed deeper themes of loss and longing that spoke to experiences far beyond her apparent age. Both children had learned to navigate the careful balance between embracing their new opportunities and honoring the memories of their previous life. They spoke privately with Jennifer and their father about their birth mother, their tribal heritage, and the reservation community they missed. These conversations happened in whispers and behind closed doors, sacred moments of remembering that helped maintain their connection to who they had been before. Circumstances forced them to become someone else. The most significant challenge had been explaining their family structure to outsiders without revealing too much about their history. Jennifer was introduced as a family friend who had moved in to help with childcare. But over time, the community had simply accepted them as an unconventional but loving family unit. Teachers, neighbors, and friends saw the obvious care and affection between all four family members and asked few questions about the specific legal or romantic relationships involved. As the third anniversary of their relocation approached, the family faced new decisions about their future. The girls were entering adolescence and beginning to ask more sophisticated questions about their identity, their heritage, and the possibility of ever reconnecting with their past. Joseph was considering proposing marriage to Jennifer, recognizing that their partnership had evolved into something deeper than convenience or necessity. Jennifer herself was completing her education degree and preparing to begin her teaching career, finally achieving the professional goals she had set aside to protect this family. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had found her calling not in a traditional classroom but in the informal education she had provided to Lily and Rose during their most vulnerable years. The morning routine continued with its comfortable predictability as the family prepared for another ordinary day in their extraordinary life. Joseph kissed both girls goodbye as they headed to the school bus, a gesture of paternal affection that had once been calculated to maintain their cover, but had long since become genuine expression of love. Jennifer straightened Rose's backpack and reminded Lily about her after-school science club, playing the role she had chosen with increasing naturalness. As Joseph prepared to leave for work, he paused to touch Jennifer's hand briefly, a moment of connection that spoke volumes about how their relationship had evolved. They had built something beautiful from the fragments of their shattered previous lives, creating stability and love from circumstances that could have destroyed them all. The secret that had once threatened to tear apart Joseph's family had ultimately brought them something none of them could have imagined. A chosen family bound together by shared sacrifice, mutual protection, and unconditional love. They had lost their past but gained each other, and in the quiet suburban morning of their new life, that exchange felt like a gift rather than a loss. Standing at the kitchen window watching Joseph's truck disappear down the tree-lined street, Jennifer reflected on the 18-year-old girl who had arrived at a remote reservation cabin with nothing but good intentions and a desire to help. That girl could never have imagined the journey that awaited her, the dangers she would face or the family she would gain, but she had made her choices with courage and love, and those choices had led to this moment, ordinary and precious in its very simplicity. The secret was no longer a burden to be carried, but a foundation upon which they had built their new life together.